All right, good afternoon. We're going to go ahead and get started. So this is a professional development session on outcomes, assessments, and compliance assist. This will be recorded, so if you want to receive the recording later on, just let me know and I can send that to you. So let's go ahead and get started here. I don't know if it's going to take us the full hour or not to cover outcomes, assessments, and compliance assist, but we'll get started here. All right, for today's schedule, we have three main parts I want to kind of go over and review with you. And also, if you have any questions, just stop me, whether you can chat me or use the raise the hand symbol or whatever. Just let me know, and I will be happy to answer your questions as we go through this. So today's schedule, we're going to start in part one. What are outcomes and assessments and why are they important? So we'll look at a couple of definitions of what an assessment is or what an outcome is, and then talk about why they're important. And then in the second part of today's presentation, we'll look at the three steps of assessment, kind of learn what they are and how it relates to our college and kind of what we do with that. And then in the third and final part, we're going to be looking at compliance assist, um, kind of where to find compliance assist, kind of walk you through the steps and getting you through the menu items to get you where you need to be so you can record your outcomes and assessments into compliance assist. Okay. So let's get started here in part one. What is an assessment? So what you see on the screen here, you see two definitions of assessment. So there's lots of different definitions out there for what an assessment is. This first definition is related more for maybe courses or academic programs and that type of thing. An assessment is a systematic collection, review, and use of information about educational programs undertaken for the purpose of improving student learning and development. So on the academic side, we assess students in their individual courses, and we also need to assess students at the program level. Okay, so at the course level objectives needs to connect with the program level objectives, and the program level objectives and assessments need to connect with the college's overall mission, vision, and goals. So there's a big long connection here between individual courses, the program, and the college overall. So again, on the academic side in courses and with programs, we are kind of collecting, reviewing, and using this information to help improve student learning and development. So a big thing with individual courses and in programs, we want to ensure that students are learning the material that they need to learn. So what do they need to learn for each individual course? What do they need to know for the program? And this is not just important for the student, it's also important as they move on after they graduate from us as well. So if they're transferring to a four-year college, they need to know that the four-year college needs to know that we're teaching at the same level that they are. So students want their courses to be able to transfer to four-year colleges. So are we helping them in meeting that goal and objective? Um, Also, on the program level side, on the employer side, the employers, when they hire graduates, they want to ensure that they want to know that our graduates have the knowledge and skills that they need in order to do the job for the company and work in the industry and that type of thing. So that's what an assessment is on the academic side. On the bottom definition, it's the process of gathering, documenting information and data that are appropriate, applicable, and relevant in evaluating a particular time-bound course of action. Okay, so this is more like on the service area side. So like for the library, admissions, advising, financial aid, those type of departments. My department being like institutional effectiveness and research. We are service area departments. We are indirectly related to, for example, student success in the classroom. However, what we do as a service area is important to student learning. It's helping students meet their educational and career goals outside of the classroom. So the second definition is like looking at the service area departmental level. Are we gathering and using information and data to help us make better decisions to help us serve the student? Okay, so that's what an assessment is. Is there any questions before we move on? All right, so we'll go ahead and continue. So now that we discussed what assessments are, why are they important? So one reason why we do, and probably honestly the main reason we do assessments, is that it is a SAC COC requirement, so accreditation purposes. Okay, so outcomes and assessments is required by SAC COC, and what you see up here, these are the various SAC standards that requires outcome and assessments, and requires us to report on how we do outcomes and assessments, the results of those assessments, how we're using this data to improve the college and that type of thing. So we got SAC standard 7.3 dealing with administrative effectiveness. So at the administrative level of the college, they do outcomes and assessments to assess our college's ability to meet its mission, vision, and goals. And then we got in sections 8.1, 8.2, and 8.2A, B, and C. In these four standards, it's looking at student achievement, looking at educational programs, general education, and then in 2C, student services. This will be the support areas and that type of thing. How are we using outcomes and assessments to support the college in its mission, vision, and goals? So it all relates to the mission and vision of the college. So SAC COC is really, really big that everything that we do needs to connect with the mission, vision, and goals of the college. This diagram that you see on the right-hand side of this slide, this comes from SAC COC. This is a diagram that they put together for their outcomes and assessments and what they're kind of wanting us to do with that, kind of the steps involved with that. So in step 1, we identify our expected outcomes. Step 2, we identify ways to measure those outcomes. Step 3, we assess the outcomes. In step 4, we analyze the results from that assessment. And then in step 5, we use the results for improvement. And then in the 6th and final step, we repeat the process all over again. Okay, so a little bit later in the presentation today, I'm going to focus on the boxes on the left, these 3 boxes on the left-hand side, a little bit more detail, where we basically create our outcomes, assess our outcomes, and then use the results of our outcomes for improvement. Those are kind of these three boxes here on the left are kind of the main groupings, the main things that we do in outcomes and assessments. So we do outcomes and assessments in part because it is required by SAC COC. However, that should not be the only reason that we do outcomes and assessments. So SAC COC is really big into continuous improvement and thus showing that we're trying to constantly find ways to improve how we do things, both in the classroom and outside of the classroom. And that should be a goal of all of us. As a college, we're serving our students and we're serving the employers that are hiring our students after they graduate from us. And both the students and employers, they want to know that our students, our graduates, have the skills and knowledge that they need to help them get a job. So why is continuous improvement important? Because sometimes, honestly, with colleges and employers, there may be, whether it's real or perceived, there may be a gap between the skills that we think our students are getting versus what employers are wanting their wanting their employees to have from us. So here's a statistic I found. I was in a webinar about a month or so ago and gave us some statistics on this slide, and you'll see some more on the next slide that I found kind of interesting and relevant to our discussion here. Only 1/3 of students believe they will graduate with the skills and knowledge to be successful in the job market and in the workplace, and just half, 53%, believe that their major will lead to a good job. And this came from a Gallup poll in 2017. So this is basically students' perception, thinking only 1/3 believe that they're going to have the skills and knowledge that they need when they graduate with a college degree. And only slightly over half of college graduates believe that their major will lead to a good job. So we need to improve on this, whether this is a real skills gap or perceived skills gap by students. Either way, we need to find ways to improve. If we can improve, we can close that gap and help give students the skills and knowledge that they need to be successful. Another statistic, just 5% of US adults say high school grads are very prepared for success in the workplace, and only 13% of US adults say the same thing about college graduates. And this came from the Pew Research in 2021. And another statistics from the National Association of Colleges and Employers, the biggest divide was around students' professionalism and work ethic. Almost 90% of seniors thought they were competent in these areas, but only 43% of employers agreed. So our students are not only our customers, but their employers that are hiring our students, they're also our customers, so to speak. So we want to make sure that we're finding ways to improve our college, our academic programs, our service areas, to help give our students the skills that they need to not only help our students, but to also help our employers as well. Okay. All right, so that's part one. Before we move into part two, does anybody have any questions before we move on? Okay. Yes, go ahead.
I was just saying, no, I'm good. Sorry.
Oh, okay. All right, we'll move on into part two now, where we're going to talk about the 3 steps of assessment. So here you see on this diagram, these are actually, if you think back a few minutes ago, we looked at that diagram from SAC COC that had the 6 steps on it. Well, these 3 steps that you see here are on the left-hand side of that diagram. Kind of named a little differently, but it's referring to the same thing. So the 3 steps of our assessment are creating outcomes, gathering evidence, and then using the data for improvement. So when we do outcomes and assessments every year, we have call a 3-year cycle, where we create at the beginning of the 3-year cycle, we do basically step 1 in this process. We create our outcomes, and we're going to use these same outcomes for the entire 3-year cycle. Okay, that's the goal. So step 1 basically is done really at the beginning of that 3-year cycle where we create our outcomes. And coming up here in a couple of minutes, I'll talk a little bit more about creating outcomes and some tips and hints on how to create effective outcomes. These last 2 steps, gathering evidence and using data for improvement, these 2 steps are done throughout the 3-year cycle. So again, in step 1, we create our outcomes, and then in step 2, we're going to gather our evidence. Okay, we're going to assess those outcomes. Whether for academic programs, that could be a student assignment. We may assign the students an assignment that's measuring our outcome. Okay, or for the service area, we may use like a survey. For example, there's a college services survey that's out there right now. That basically is having faculty and staff evaluate the various services within the colleges, the various departments within the colleges. Well, some departments use some of the questions from that survey for their outcomes and assessments as a way to measure their outcome and assessment. So we create our outcomes, and we got to gather the evidence. So we're going to figure out how we're going to basically assess it. We assess it, and we gather that evidence and analyze it. And then that leads us to step 3, where we use the data for improvement. This is called closing the loop. Okay, we don't just do assessments for the sake of assessments. We want to, again, it goes back to continuous improvement. Okay, we assess this. These are our goals. These are our outcomes. We assessed it. Did we meet our goal? Did we meet our outcome? Okay, and then if we didn't, then what can we do to improve? So closing the loop is basically writing a short narrative that basically is our improvement plan. How can I improve on what we've been doing? How can I improve on the results? So if I did not meet my goal, what can I do to meet my goal next time? Even if I met my goal, there's always room for improvement. So even though I may have met my goal, what can I continue to do? What can I do to continue to improve? So we're always looking for ways to improve. So again, the 3 steps of assessments: creating outcomes, gathering evidence, using data for improvement. So let's focus here for a couple minutes on the creating outcome step, the first step. So here's some hints and some tips in creating outcomes. So this professional development seminar here is going on kind of at a good time in that we are coming to the end of our current 3-year cycle. Okay, so you should have received an email from me probably a couple weeks ago stating that in Compliance Assist, you need to enter your 2021-22 outcomes and assessments into Compliance Assist. Well, this is the last of our 3-year cycle. So another thing that you're going to be doing a little bit later on in a few weeks, in the coming weeks and months, is basically doing what's called an end of cycle report. That's reporting is like taking a big picture, a big view of the past 3 years of our assessments and evaluating your program or evaluating your department to see what were your strengths and weaknesses, what were your challenges, what can I do to improve in the future, and that type of thing. And then the last part of that end of cycle report, you're going to be creating outcomes, new outcomes for the next 3-year cycle that's going to start in the 2022-23 academic year. So coming up in the coming weeks and months, you're going to be creating new outcomes for your programs and for your departments. So here's some hints and tips to kind of help you start thinking about how to write effective outcomes. So here's an acronym that there's different acronyms out there that you can use to help you write an effective outcome. The one I'm going to look at today is called the SMART outcomes. So we want to create SMART outcomes. So it stands for specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, and time-based. So we want to, when we create outcomes, we want to make them as specific as we can. So I actually come from the academic side in my previous employment. I was a professor in business and department head at a community college in Oklahoma before I moved back to North Carolina about a year ago. And one of the classes I taught was a personal finance class. And one of the topics we talked about in that class was planning for retirement. So to give an example of why it's important to create a specific outcome. So if I had a retirement goal, my retirement goal was I want to have enough money for retirement. That's my goal. Is that an effective goal? No, it's probably not. The reason it's not very good and very effective is it's not specific at all. So I want to have enough money to retire. When do I want to retire? What's my retirement age goal? How much money do I want to have to retire? Or how much money do I need to retire? So just stating that I want to have enough money to retire, that's not an effective goal. Whereas if I say I want to retire at the age of 65 with at least $500,000 in my retirement account. That's a much better goal because it's specific. I have basically a goal. I want to have a $500,000 saved for retirement. I'll have another goal. I want to retire by the age I'm 65. So I can use that information then, and I can start to create, basically do some calculations and start figuring out, well, how much money do I need to save every year or every month or every paycheck in order to help me achieve that goal and that type of thing. So having specific goals, we want to have specific goals. It helps us achieve our goals in a better way. The next thing in the acronym is measurable. Our outcomes and assessments need to be measurable. I'm sure you've all heard the saying, the squeaky wheel gets the oil. Well, there's kind of another saying, what gets measured gets managed. So if we can measure it, we can see and track how we're progressing in meeting this outcome and assessment. So we want to write outcomes that we can measure in some way. Can you track the progress and measure the outcome? How much, how many, how will I know when my goal is accomplished? So we don't have some type of way to measure the outcome when you write an effective outcome. Another thing to consider is we want our outcome to be attainable or achievable. Is the goal reasonable enough to be accomplished? So with this, we don't want to write an outcome that's unrealistically hard to meet, but at the same time, we don't want to write an outcome that's too easy to meet as well. We want to try and find some happy middle ground. So let me explain the problems of the two extremes. So we don't want to, our goal is continuous improvement. So we want to push ourselves to try and improve, but at the same time, we don't want to make the goal, our goal, too hard or too difficult or even impossible to meet. So if we get halfway through our 3-year cycle, we realize this goal, there's no way we're ever going to meet this goal because it's too hard and too difficult. What's likely to happen is we're just going to give up and stop trying. And that's not the right thing to do. We want to constantly be trying to improve. So we don't want to make the goal too hard or impossible to meet, but at the same time, we don't want to make it too easy as well. So if we make it too easy, we're not really pushing ourselves for continuous improvement. So we want to write goals that are attainable and achievable. We want to try and find that happy middle ground where the goal is not too easy or too difficult, and write a goal that will help us improve. Next, we want to write goals that are relevant. Is the goal worthwhile? Will it meet your needs? Is it consistent with the other goals you have? That type of thing. So we want to write goals that are realistic for our programs or for our service areas. And then the last part of the acronym is timely. Your objective should include a time limit. I would complete this, or I want to achieve this by such and such date. Okay? So we want to write SMART outcomes. Next is Bloom's taxonomy. So when we write outcomes, we want to use action words or action verbs, excuse me. Why is it important to use action verbs? Well, if we can use action verbs in writing our outcomes, it helps us with the measurement part of that SMART acronym. So it helps us, the action verbs are usually our verbs that will help us measure the outcome that we're trying to achieve. So here you see a diagram. You can Google Bloom's taxonomy. You'll see a lot of different diagrams out there. Honestly, that's what I did, and that's where I got this. So this is one diagram that I picked. There are others out there as well. And Bloom's taxonomy basically recognizes, this is kind of focusing a little bit more maybe on the student learning outcomes for programs, for academic programs, but there's different levels of student learning. So there's the knowledge level, which is kind of the basic level of learning, and then you start moving up the pyramid as you see here: comprehension, application, analysis, evaluation, so on and so forth. So with Bloom's taxonomy, every level has action verbs that you can use. So when you're getting ready to do your outcomes for the next 3-year cycle in the next few weeks, you can pull this up, or you can Google Bloom's taxonomy again and find different diagrams like this and use these action verbs. Use diagrams like this to help you select action verbs that can help you write effective outcomes for your area. So again, this is kind of focusing more on the program side, but like if we want to assess student knowledge, some action verbs that will help us assess student knowledge will be like define, describe, relate, state, reproduce. Those are action verbs for knowledge. If we want to assess student learning dealing with comprehension, we can use action verbs like have them explain, or describe this process, or discuss this topic, or identify something, so on and so forth. Or with application, we can have them solve this problem, have them manipulate some data, do some calculations of some sort, compute, discover, choose. Those are some action verbs for application. Dropping down to the bottom of the list, evaluate. So if we're assessing students' ability to evaluate, to critique something, we can use action verbs like critique, or justify, defend, or describe, or judge, or support. Different things like that. So those who are over academic areas, when you're writing your student learning outcomes for your courses and for your programs, first thing you need to do is basically determine what level of learning are you trying to evaluate of your students. So if you're evaluating their knowledge of something, you want to use the action verbs in the knowledge category. If you want to analyze their analysis, the analysis side of learning, you want to use these action verbs here, so on and so forth. Okay. All right, now the next thing, once we select our action verbs, now it's time to start writing our outcomes. Okay. This slide focuses on more academic outcomes for programs. The next slide will give some examples of service area outcomes. But no matter if it's an academic program or a service area, you can follow this format that we have up here at the top. Basically, the population will be able to plug in your action verb and then state your intended result. So for academic programs, some examples would be our population will be students. Students will be able to cite legal resources in writing. Okay, students will be able to, and then cite is our action verb, and then legal resources in writing is our intended result. Or students will be able to demonstrate proficiency to interpret construction site building plans for schedules, specs, and compliance. Or students will be able to solve algebraic equation and inequalities. Or students will be able to describe the flow of energy and matter within and among organisms. So those are some examples of student learning outcomes or program level outcomes on the academic side. Here's some examples for those who are in the service area side. I got these basically from Google. I Googled service area outcomes, and here I found some good ones here to give as an illustration. So here's one for like an IT department. Faculty and staff will readily have access to the technology and services provided by the information technology department to support a successful college environment. Okay. Or here's one for campus safety. Students, staff, and community members will indicate that they feel safe while on campus. Well, how would I measure this? Well, it says indicate. Well, if the college that does a survey on campus safety, we could use that survey, those survey questions, to basically assess this outcome. So when you write outcomes, you also then need to also think about how I'm going to assess that outcome. How am I going to measure it? Facilities. An example from the facilities department. Faculty, staff, and students will report they are satisfied with the safety, cleanliness, maintenance, and visual attractiveness of the campus buildings and grounds they visit. And the last one here deals with financial aid. Students will be able to identify financial aid resources for which they may qualify, submit applications, and meet deadlines. Okay. In all of these outcomes, I'm going to go back. All of these outcomes on both slides basically follow this format. The population, whether it's students, faculty, or staff, will be able to plug in your action verb and then from there state your intended results. Okay. Any questions so far or comments? Okay. Then we'll move on. So when we write our outcomes, we need to then think about how are we going to assess this outcome and then start gathering the data. So as you're writing your outcome, start thinking about what am I going to use to measure the outcome, and then also think about your criteria for success. So if we're going to measure this outcome and assess and collect data on these outcomes, how do we know we were successful in achieving our goal or not? So that's why we need to, when we do this, also determine our criteria for success. Here's an example. Again, this is from the academic side, but the example could be 80% of the students will score a 75% or better on the assignment. So that is our criteria for success. So when we assess our students in a class or for a semester or for the whole academic year, we can then basically gather their grades, figure out did 80%, what percentage of those grades of those students made 75% or better, and then compare that to our criteria, and then that would tell us whether we met the goal or not. Okay, so we want to determine our criteria for success. This is important because it helps us determine if we met our goal or not. So if we don't state our criteria for success, we're never going to know whether we met our goal or not. Okay, and then we need to analyze it. So to continue with this example, our criteria, 80% of students will score a 75% or better on the assignment. And let's say after we did the assessment, results come back and it shows that 88% of the students scored a 75% or higher on the assignment. So we met our goal, okay? Excuse me. So we met our goal. So when we report the results, we want to report the percentage result. We want to report that 88% of the students scored 75% or higher. And then along with that, we want to indicate whether we met or did not meet our goal. Okay, so state our actual result and then state met or not met. Okay, and then if you did not meet your goal, don't feel too bad about that. Especially the first year we're assessing something, we may not meet the goal right away, and that's okay. The whole point of this, though, is continuous improvement. So if you didn't meet your goal, just state you did not meet your goal. This was our result. We did not meet our goal. And then we go on to basically close the loop, so to speak. What is our improvement plan? What can I do moving forward to help us be more successful and make it more likely that we will achieve our goal? Okay. So that leads us to this slide, improving the process, closing the loop. Okay. The purpose of our student learning outcomes on the academic side or service area outcomes on the support side is determine if, on the academic side, if students are learning the material and to help us improve our abilities in helping them be successful. And on the service area side, the purpose is to determine if our department is helping the college achieve its mission, vision, and goals. Okay, so whether we met our goal or not, we want to constantly try and find ways to improve. So what did I do this past year to improve, and what can I do in the future to improve as well? So how did we improve in the past, and what are our plans to improve for the future? So here in a couple minutes, I'm going to show you some slides related to Compliance Assist and show you where how to access Compliance Assist and that type of thing. So when we get to the close the loop part in Compliance Assist, there's two sections to that. First section is going to be, what did I do to close the loop this past year? What was my improvement plan? What did I do this year to improve on this outcome? And then the second part is, what is my plan for the future? What is my plan for next year to improve on this outcome? So make sure that you report on both. Okay. So that leads us to the third part, Compliance Assist. Okay. So the third and last part of our presentation today, Compliance Assist. This is the program that we use to document, track, report our outcomes and assessments. For those who have used Compliance Assist before, you know it's not the most user-friendly of programs. If you've never used it before, you will probably quickly learn that is not the most friendly of programs. I've never used, I'm 2 months into this, my job here, in my position here, and I've never used Compliance Assist before, so this is my first experience with it. And to be honest, it's an old program. It's not very user-friendly, but it's the program that we have to work with right now. Okay, so you access Compliance Assist through the portal. So you log in like you would log in to check your email and that type of thing on the portal. And then the Compliance Assist symbol looks like this. So if you don't have access to Compliance Assist, send me an email and I will I'll grant you access to Compliance Assist for your area. But this is the symbol on the portal, what it looks like that you click to open up Compliance Assist. When you open up Compliance Assist, you're going to see a page. This is a copy of a partial page. It's kind of the welcome page in Compliance Assist. And I will point our attention up here in the top left corner of this diagram. When you open up Compliance Assist or log into it, you're going to log into, probably land on what's called the landing site. To record your outcomes and assessments, we need to be in the program review site. So if you're in the landing site, you get to program review by clicking on this drop down arrow and then click program review. So when you log into Compliance Assist, you're on the landing site. Again, click the arrow and then click program review. All right. Then you need to select, make sure if you're an academic program, make sure you select and make sure the instructional program is selected here. If you're in the service area, or make sure a service area is selected, so on and so forth. So you do that by, if it's not there automatically, most of you are only going to have one option here. So you're not going to have a choice, it's just one option. Others may have a couple of options here. So if you're not seeing the option that you need, just click the arrow and then click on the option that you need. Once you select your, whether instructional area or service area, so on and so forth, then you got to select your program, and you do that on this arrow that has layout options. And this lists all the programs. Again, you're not going to have access to all of these programs. You're only going to have access to the programs that you're overseeing. Most people only oversee one area. So for most people, they're not going to have an option here. They're just going to, their one program that or department that they're overseeing will be there. There are a few people that may have multiple areas here that they're going to be reporting on. So you switch back and forth by clicking on the drop down arrow. Once you select your department or program, then we're going to click on, you're going to see various tabs up here. So to report for your 2021-22 outcomes and assessments, you're going to click on this 2018-2022 outcome assessment plan and report tab. Okay. There are, since I created this PowerPoint, you should see two other tabs up here as well. When you log into Compliance Assist, you should now have access to an end of cycle tab where you'll be doing your end of cycle reporting. And then there should be also another new tab called 2022 to 2025 outcomes and assessments, where you'll be creating your new outcomes and assessments for the next 3-year cycle. Okay, so when you click on the 2018-2022 tab, your screen's going to pop up something like this. This is an instructional program side, but the service area side is going to look very similar. So it doesn't matter if you're instructional program or the service area, you're going to click on 2A. For instructional programs, it says student learning outcomes. For service area, it will say service area outcomes. But in both places, it's section 2A that you're going to click on. And when you click on it, it's going to take you to a page that looks like this. Okay. And on this page, it has basically tables for your student learning outcomes. And you need to be able to edit those tables. Up here in the top right part of Compliance Assist, you're going to click the drop down arrow on options and then click edit item. And that'll allow you to edit the document. Okay. So here is basically a template for student outcomes for 2018-19 through the 21-22 academic years. Okay. And in this table, there are several columns. So the left-hand column is for your student learning outcomes. When you open up Compliance Assist, you're going to see several of these tables. I believe there's 7 tables set up, something like that. You need to have at least 3 outcomes. So all programs, all departments should have at least 3 outcomes that they're assessing for each 3-year cycle. So you don't have to fill in all 7 tables. I mean, you can if you want to assess 7 different outcomes, but the minimum is you need to really do 3 outcomes. So you're going to do 1 table, 1 for each outcome. Okay, or do a table for each outcome rather. Sorry about that. So for each outcome, you're going to state your attended student learning outcome if you're an academic program, or a service area outcome if you're a service area. You're going to have your program goal or your service area goal that's here. So basically your outcomes is going to tie in with your departmental goals. Okay, so your departmental program goals are listed here, and then your student learning outcome here. And then our measure, what is my method of assessing this outcome, this learning outcome? Whether it could be an assignment, it could be a survey, whatever it is, how I'm going to assess a student learning outcome. And then here, this column, criteria, this is where I indicate my target for success. For example, we looked at an example earlier, 80% of the students will score a 75% or better is maybe our criteria for success. I would state that here. Then we have a results column where we're going to record our results. So when you record your results, state the percentage as well as met or not met. So in the example we're working with, our goal was 80% of students will score 75% or better. And I believe the example was earlier that 88% of students scored a 75% or better. So under results, I would put 88% and then met, because I met my goal. My goal was 80%. we exceeded that with 88%, so put 88% and then met. Or maybe only 70% of the students scored a 75% or higher. So then I would put 70% and then not met, indicating I did not meet my goal. And then the last thing you need to do in Compliance Assist with this is under the improvement column, there's two sides to this. The left-hand side is how did you close the loop last year? And the right-hand side is how do you plan to close the loop next year? Okay, so for closing the loop last year, what things did I do this past year to help improve on this outcome? So write a short narrative describing what I did this past year to improve on this outcome. And then on the right-hand side, how do you plan to close the loop next year? What is my plan moving forward? What is my plan for next year to help me improve on this outcome? So when you do this, make sure you do both sides. What did I do this past? Also report on what do I plan to do next year. Okay, any questions with that? Okay. All right, so Compliance Assist. So we need to record the following items in the table that we just looked at. Again, your student learning outcomes. And as I talked about in the very beginning today, your student learning outcomes or your service area outcomes, those are written at the very beginning of the 3-year cycle process. Okay, so the student learning outcomes and then the program outcomes, that's done at the very beginning of the process. And then the rest of this is done throughout the 3-year process. So what is my measure? How am I going to measure this outcome? What's my criteria for success? What are my results? Write down, record your results and whether you met or did not meet your results. And then discuss your close the loop process or write a short narrative. What did I do last year to improve? What's my plan next year to improve? So on and so forth. And one last thing, don't forget about this. This is a SAC COC requirement. With SAC COC, they basically state if you don't have any documentation on something, then as far as they are concerned, it did not happen. So if we don't have any documentation proving that we did something, SAC basically says then it didn't happen. So what this means for us with our outcomes and assessments, we need to upload documentation that basically shows our student learning outcome. So more documentation is, yes, we want documentation. So on your documentation, it could be the results of your assessment. That would be a good thing you could document. Any documentation that you can show of how you improved on the process, any improvement plans, any documentation with that, that's another good thing to include with that. So in Compliance Assist, when you're in that, let me go backwards on my PowerPoint slide. So in Compliance Assist, when you're in this area where you're basically writing in and filling in these tables, if you scroll, I don't have a picture of it, but if you scroll to the very bottom of this part of Compliance Assist, you'll have an area called Sources. And this is where you'll upload your sources. So there should be a button that you can click where you upload your documentation sources. I do make one request. When you upload these sources, it would be very, very helpful for you and for everybody who's basically reviewing this and looking at it, if you would include basically the year in which student learning outcome it goes with, or service area outcome it goes with. So if this documentation is for service area outcome 2 for 2021-22, basically name your document that you're uploading 2021 through 2022 student learning outcome 2 or service area outcome 2. Have that in the name somewhere. That makes it a lot easier to go back and see for if SAC COC, when it comes time for accreditation and they pull this up for your program and they want to see the documentation for it, well, it's a lot easier for them to find. So it'll be a lot easier for you to see and find later on as well. So that's something I've learned kind of very quickly in the 2 months I've been in this position is when you name these documents, make sure you include the year as well as which student learning outcome it goes with. Another way you can do it as well, you can actually create folders under that sources section. So you could create a folder for each year or a folder for each student learning outcome. That's another way to kind of organize that as well. All right, so we are at the conclusion of my presentation on student learning outcomes. So to conclude, outcomes and assessments are important because SACS requires it, but going beyond that, we want to constantly find ways to improve. So we want to gather and use data so we can make wiser, more informed decisions to help us improve our processes and improve our ability to meet our students' needs. And then we talked about the 3 steps of assessment. So we create outcomes, gather evidence, and use data for improvement. And then I just showed you a little bit of how to, in Compliance Assist, where to basically go to report on your outcomes in assessments. Okay. Is there any questions? Anybody have any questions? All right, before we go, I just want to highlight and say that if you ever need help, please, please, please let me know. I am more than happy to help you. So if you ever need help, whether it's writing outcomes and assessments or help using Compliance Assist or anything like that, please do not hesitate to reach out to me. I'll be more than happy to help you. And that's it for today. Hope you guys have a good day, and thank you for joining me today.
Hey, Brian, I got a question for you.
Yes.
By the way, you got a cool name.
Thank you. I'm assuming you're Brian as well.
So I'm going to work with my supervisor on this for this time, because when I started here, I started in June, and it was just, I had way too much stuff going on. My year end, our finance side's really busy. And I've dealt with SACS before, but this is some new stuff. I've never really had to do so much in depth with it from a financial standpoint. Is there a way I can just like swipe everything clean and just start fresh from my perspective? Because it's hard for me to evaluate what's happened in the past when I don't know, and it's hard for me to assess something that I wasn't engaged with. Does that make some sense?
I totally hear where you're coming from.
Bottom line, I'm just looking for a better opportunity or a different way I can do it. I mean, Compliance Assist is really, like you said, it's not really a good functioning tool, but we deal with it because we have to. I'm just trying to think of some better ways and things that I could do differently, because for me, it just seems I'm in the business office, and our impact to students is minimal to what we do compared to the other service areas. Financial aid, admissions, they really do numbers and take stuff. Like, we don't really keep data of any kind. We don't really store any data or anything, except for AR data for the students' AR accounts. And the financial people, it does impact the SACS annual financial report we have to submit every year. I know about that. So I understand that perspective. I just was wondering could I do it differently or revamp it myself, or?
Well, we're going to be starting a new 3-year cycle next academic year.
Okay.
So that would be the perfect time to wipe the slate clean and start.
Okay.
Kind of start over. I don't know if it's really possible for 21, 22.
Yeah. And I kind of thought that may be the case based on where we are and where we're going to the next step. So.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, if we were kind of like, if this was like year 1, we're ending year 1, maybe we can wipe the slate clean, but this is actually a 4-year cycle, not a 3-year, because of COVID. They added a 4th year.
Okay.
So I think it would be hard to kind of go back and do that for this year. So I guess I just have to kind of struggle with that with this year. But with the end of cycle, and then with the new 3-year cycle starting next academic year, that's the perfect time to do that.
Awesome. Okay, that works.
Yeah,
I can handle it.
Yep.
Appreciate it. Thank you for your help today.
Welcome. All right. Thank you. Any other questions before we go?